Suzanne, you ready to do the next session together? We can start 30 seconds early.
I am, Joy. Looking forward to it.
Cool. All right, so what we're going to transition to, and actually before we make the transition, I want to take this transition time to do our acknowledgement. So if everybody take your hands off the computer, no typing, no clicking, and take hold of your own hand. We are not alone. We have power in our hands. This is not a light topic. And in this conversations and through this work, we intellectualize and abstract a set of very real experiences. These discussions trigger a wide range of emotions. Sometimes, I hope one of those emotions is hope. And yet in this room, statistically, are many, many survivors of gender-based violence. And we all participate in the political, social, cultural, and economic systems that give permission for and facilitate violence. A moment of silence to acknowledge the violence happening in this precise moment, somewhere, to someone. Now reverse your hands and notice the difference. We've come together to create new possibilities to address the epidemic of violence in our world, and connected in new ways, we can do even more. So let us begin and continue and move forward in so many different adjectives. But what we wanted to take the next 30 minutes for is to transition with a conversation between Susanna and I about the field of gender lens investing. And realizing that many of you, this is not the place you live in. So this sort of field of gender lens investing is potentially a foreign field somewhere, a distant field of flowers in another hemisphere or something. But thinking about the field of gender lens investing and the initial framing for this was, why hasn't gender-based violence been addressed within gender lens investing to date? We're going to address that a little bit because I think it's instructive about where the field of gender lens investing is, to think about why largely it hasn't taken on the issue of gender-based violence. But really what we want to focus on is, where are the points of leverage where we can push, encourage, cajole, maneuver, scheme to have it take on gender-based violence more effectively. So with that, are we asking everybody to turn off their videos and so it can just be Suzanne and I? Am I right about this, LD?
You got it.
Oh no.
For just because we're filming, we're going to ask everyone to just hide their videos.
Great.
Thank you so much.
And then it comes back to Suzanne and I. Magically, are we supposed to pop up in some new view? If you go to the speaker view. Gotcha.
You
So
show up correctly for me in the recording when we do it this way. So
that's also really
feel free, because we can't see you, to give us, positive reinforcement. Since it's hard not to get to see people's expressions.
Yeah, we'll do this a bit and then we'll take questions, and feel free, as you always do, to use the chat to raise questions, right? If there's things you'd like us to address,
yeah.
LD will call attention to it, since we'll be immersed in each other rather than the chat. So, hey, Suzanne, you want to kick us off and just sort of give a definition of gender lens investing? What is the field? Where did it come from?
Okay, thank you, Joy, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's been such an extraordinary experience to be part of this over the last couple of weeks with you. So I think at this point, people here know that gender lens investing while it's been around for much longer, was more formalized as a field about 10 years ago with the work that Criterion Institute brought forward and
many others.
And many others who are in this community and not here. This is about the intentional use of a gender analysis to get to a better outcome. And this can be thought of where you're being intentional to say, I want to get more capital to women entrepreneurs or women leaders. I want to look at the products and services that positively affect women or specifically address issues that disproportionately affect women. I want to think about investing across where gender shows up across value chains. So you can really say, I want to direct my capital, but it's equally showing up as where do you look at a gender analysis in any investment, whether you are consciously directing your capital in one of those directions or saying, where is it material? Where does it matter? And what's the process by which we're investing, not just what are we investing in and who's doing the investing. That really matters. So the field, when I got into this 20 years ago, there was one public markets fund that I could be invested in, which launched in 1993. And there were, you could do a lot of microfinance. And there were a few things that one could do to really find, of course, high tech, high growth women entrepreneurs. But if you wanted to be in a venture capital fund, if you wanted to be in a private debt fund, if you wanted to be in a real estate fund with a gender lens or a green fund with a gender lens, these things were not around. And so now fast forward, Veris Wealth Partners, I support them in their report on tracking the field on the public market side, has most recently tracked over 55 public market strategies. So that is mutual funds and ETFs and ETNs and separately managed account strategies and the things that you've hopefully been hearing about for the last 2 weeks. My work with Wharton Social Impact Initiative, we've been tracking since 2017 the growth of venture capital, private equity, and private debt funds with a gender lens. And it went from, again, a small handful of funds. I think we were saying on the phone on the other day, you could put them all on one PowerPoint slide with a 2x2 matrix, to now 138 funds in our most recent scan, 200 funds actually in total that we're tracking through Gender Smart Investing Summit. $4.8 billion moved across these different funds that range from, people raising $500,000 into a fund of women investing in women, all the way through to funds that are $500, $600, $700 million. And so,
just worth noting on those numbers, just to highlight this, those are also just the funds that have a mandate to do this.
Yeah.
There's
I think so. This is the other place that the field has some confusion, I think, is that there are gender lens mandate funds, and then there are funds, and I'll just call out a few like Trillium and Boston Common and Walden, that do a really solid gender analysis in their fund, but don't have a labeled product. And when I speak about what's the size of the field, I talk about the bottom-up analysis in the gender lens mandate funds that gets us to, somewhere between $8 and $10 billion moved. When the US SIF talks about how much money has moved for the gender lens, they ask the institutional asset managers, the people who move in institutional capital and private capital on behalf of wealthy people, do you look at gender as a factor of analysis in addition to animal rights and no nuclear and environmental issues and no prisons? Do you look at all at gender? If so, check the box. And then that's how they get to $858 billion moved. And there are many good debates that we could have around when you don't actually then ask, what is it that you're really looking at? Then how deep is that? So they could say, well, I'm just looking at one woman on the board. I pay attention to gender, check the box. They're in that 858 billion. So we're still in a mode in the field of saying, how big is it? Who's doing it? What does it look like? What's the size and shape? What does it mean? And that's, I think, part of the challenge for where GBV comes in as an investment theme is that just gender lens investing overall is still not evenly understood.
Right. And it's a wide, I mean, I think what's really useful about the overview is there's a wide array from very light analysis to very deep analysis. And there's probably the volume of capital moving on the very light analysis is, as expected, significantly bigger than the money that's moving with a really deep analysis. And part of the work has been, how do we move more of the, or how do we move better analysis to more capital, right? So that it is not a, it's not just a thin tick box. Is it a woman-led business? And is there a woman, are there 3 or a third or whatever number you're looking for women on boards, but that it's really looking more broadly. And I think that is, I would venture to say, and I'm curious, in the answer to why gender-based violence hasn't been included, which is also partly why Criterion chose to focus on the issue. I'll name a couple and see what you want to add to this. One is there was a focus on identity as the core analysis, right? Counting women, right? Because that seemed like a data point people could get to. How many women in leadership? How many women on the board? How many women-led businesses in your portfolio? And so the counting women versus analyzing power or gender dynamics has definitely been the leading, sort of the leading approach. And it's hard when all you had to do was count how many women are in leadership. Then any conversation about gender-based violence was simply, well, will that get more or less women in leadership, as opposed to it being an issue in and of itself. So it ended up getting sort of, it was a causal factor for those other issues, not something standing on their own. The second piece, 2 other points, and then one is we were focused more on the business case, the upside of investing with a gender lens. And a lot of the story was out of women's economic empowerment. We wanted to tell a story that women were investable and they were an opportunity, not that gender-based violence was a problem. So if I think about the early days in particular, telling a good news story about how the great activities that women are involved in was definitely a priority over structural inequities. The third piece, so a little bit more of a focus on sort of risk and, more of a focus on opportunity and telling a positive story versus a story of risk. The third thing, and this has also been true of how we look at gender-based violence, is most of the products in gender lens investing focus on what is happening inside of companies rather than on market risk, right? So it's the push to have gender-based violence be seen more like climate, that it's a ubiquitous risk affecting every company, versus about whether or not there's gender-based violence in that company, was a fairly significant mind shift for people in gender lens investing to be able to make. Curious if you have other patterns that you might want to add to those.
Yeah, I mean, I think investors want the easy route. Investment advisors, those who have investment platforms, those who are helping people move money, they want the easy, what can I do that's repeatable? What can I do that I will be able to get credit for? This is harder stuff. And so that's one, is that there isn't the just, give me the thing that I can then turn around and sell to somebody. That's part of it. I think another piece of it is that we haven't necessarily had the tools that in investor language that investors are used to for incorporating this into their analysis in a rigorous way. And we haven't necessarily, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks now, had the data translators to say, okay, this data over here really does fit with how you would go about a traditional investment analysis. And so again, people went the easy path. What can I do? What's the checklist you can give me? What's the sort of cheat sheet? And it has to be in my language, in the way that I work, right? So I think that's another piece of it.
Can I quickly build on that, Suzanne? Because I think there's a piece of that, though, that is, I can't name another issue related to gender that has also gotten to that level of depth, right? I mean, a little bit, the work that Ruth and others are doing in reproductive health is starting to get to that place. But in general, much of the analysis within gender lens investing has been relatively simple. And so it's not that we've done this in all of the other areas related to gender and we just haven't done gender-based violence. It's that there was a hesitancy. We haven't gotten to a depth of analysis because the way you sell gender lens investing is, here's a place to start, right?
Yeah, and I think that people will unfortunately look at, and we've been talking about this again for the last couple of weeks, they will look at GBV in this bucket that they call ENS, Environment and Social Analysis. And the ENS people have been positioned until more recently as the do no harm people. Let's make sure that we're not having negative unintended consequences. Let's make sure that from a compliance standpoint that we're being better actors. They haven't been until more recently viewed as sources of solutions that will give people better insights into where their investments will not only have better financial results, but better environment and social results. And so because the GBV work was situated in the ENS groups, that also meant that it's been sort of ghettoized in that area, rather than this is something that any investment manager should be looking at as a core set of questions about investability. And I think that's going in lockstep with what's happening with the ENS overall.
Yeah. And so maybe to, as we're transitioning halfway through this, what's possible, right? Because we're not done with this experiment of gender lens investing. We're not saying, oh, cool, you're doing thin analysis. We're cool with that. We'll just let you ride. So what are you seeing? What are you seeing in terms of sort of structures emerging, Gender Smart obviously being a clear starting place for this? What are you seeing in the field that will make the work that we're doing in the last couple weeks really sing?
So,
or you could just sing, which would come back to that.
Well, so for those people that don't know, I'm the co-founder of the Gender Smart Investing Summit, and Joy is on my advisory council, and a number of you are involved in the summit. So this is the place where investors and those influencing the movement of capital come together, first physically and now virtually. The first year we did this in 2018, we had $14 trillion of capital in the room, 300 people representing some of the largest institutions in the world. And the purpose was to come together to say, how do we move the field through the barriers that are keeping us from investing more strategically, with more impact, and moving more capital with more velocity. And so now, fast forward, the summit is now fully virtual. We have a 1,600 person virtual community. And again, many of those actors are influencing networks and organizations far beyond their, the one person who will show up. And so that's one structure that is a place where we can take what's come out of this event and say, what do we want the rest of that community to know about? And I think people want to know, why do I need to know about this? How do I do this? What needs to change in my own organization or in my own practice? Who do I rely on for best information and examples? Investors are like lemmings. They will follow other people into things if they think it makes sense. And if their gut tells them, oh, that's a credible person and that's a credible organization and that sounds like an interesting investment, that they need to see examples, and they need to see examples very specifically in their geography, in their sector, in their type of capital that they're deploying. So they They really, all the things you've been talking about the next level of specificity. But the infrastructure that we're building, I think, hopefully will be helpful. I think that what's also really good is that there are networks and events happening all over the world now where these conversations around gender lens investing and intersectionality are coming forward. And so this is a place where if we can get to the amplifiers, and we give them stories and data in a digestible way, and it can't be only that you have to do the really hard work or I can't have a conversation with you. You need to do the hard work, but I can have a conversation with you even if you haven't done it. I'm going to give you enough stories and examples and data to spark your interest, and I'm going to point you to really inspiring and credible people from very different places that you wouldn't get a chance to hear about. I think that will make a really big difference. We also have media that was not around 10 years ago telling the stories. And I think groups like Impact Alpha, which if anybody on this call doesn't know Impact Alpha, they are probably the most valuable voice in the impact investing space that amplifies not only within their own media, but then they have outreach with the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, and people pick up their media. They are writing about this in a way that then gets this out around the world. And the fact that, this went from being something very fringe to now Bloomberg and the Financial Times and the New York Times and the major media around the world is writing about this. I think media is really critical. So I think media, convening, networks. I think the fact that we have more and more powerful voices from different types of places, men and women, Black and brown and white, and who are starting to be able to speak more intelligently about this really makes a difference. Yeah. Because the tale needs to go along with the teller.
Well, and just to build on that, I think one of the other pieces that I'm seeing, the sort of, you and I partnered so often, partly because we come from different perspectives, right? They're looking for a message, they'll hear this message if you package it, and they're ready, and you do such an amazing job to build that momentum. We were also hearing a momentum of, and I'm curious if you were hearing this as well, of private investors, some institutional investors, and donor governments saying, hey, this gender lens investing thing, I'm not buying if it's just about women on boards, right? There's a set of people who were, I think about a conversation I had in Australia with an amazing impact investor who had discounted gender lens investing because she sort of thought, that's a thing that's just about corporate women. I'm like, well, they're important too, but it was a kind of dismissal. She sits on boards of gender-based violence organizations, and it wasn't you, Julia, because you were not just, anyway, but there was a kind of, she was dismissive of it because it didn't go deep enough. And I think that there's a growing set of voices. We hear it on people who want the field to be less binary and more addressing LGBTQ and how do we make this broader. But gender-based violence sits within, it responds also, it can respond to a set of asset managers and investors who are asking for something deeper.
Yeah, and I'm working on a new piece with Glenn Mead, with a terrific advisory council, some of whom are represented in this community, about what is the next generation of public markets gender lens vehicles that have a more sophisticated analysis than the sort of version one. Tomorrow, Wednesday, I'm speaking on a call about gender bonds, where we've looked at Lions Head Global Partners and FSD Africa have looked at what is the state of the field of gender bonds. So there have been 13 big issuances of gender bonds. It's a very new arena. Everybody hears about green bonds. Nobody knows what a gender bond is. And we're going to be talking about how, again, the sort of version 1.0 gender bonds worked and what a version 2.0 could really look like. And we have the benefit of people like Rebecca Calder really feeding in, where does GBV show up? Where does sexual and reproductive health show up? Where does access to mental health show up? Things that people who make bonds structures don't normally think about. And so what's, I think, exciting is there are now enough people who understand what these sort of first level, first order vehicles were, and now want to go much further. And so this community here is really well positioned to say, this is the 2.0.
Right.
This
right.
is
Absolutely.
where a more sophisticated approach really is. And investors not only often are like lemmings, but they will also, they want to know what's the new thing. What's the thing that nobody else has figured out? In addition to, of course, all the other work that's happening to get people to realize that this is also a moral obligation, and that this is not just about the pure, is this going to be more profitable? Is this going to be more cost effective? Is this going to make me more money? That there really is both sides coming together.
Well, and I think within that, just naming the, we're doing an analysis that should be published within a week or two, maybe 3, of looking at a power analysis of the development of the field of gender lens investing. Mm-hmm. And sort of how did we get to this place? And one of the interesting pieces is, if you think about who were the available translators to make sense between gender and finance, they sat in Deloitte and McKinsey. They were people who had worked on corporate governance and, lo and behold, also knew finance. And they sat in places where that translation could happen. Yeah. The broad field of gender lens investing has also been challenged by the lack of funding within the overall field of gender and gender analysis. So that sort of need to continue to raise up translators who do a deeper analysis, right? The sort of, who are the people who come in, and you and I both sit on these panels, and people ask us like, oh, is this a good thing? You're like, well, it's good enough for what you had, but you could do better, right? And how do we continue to build up? Because I think so much of this is human capacity and resources. Yes. And it's a power dynamic, right? Who has the resources to be able to name what gender lens investing should be about? I don't know, I lost it on some panel at one point saying I'm not going to participate in building the field that Deloitte funded anymore, right? Not fair, but like, they did good stuff, but how do we actually build the resources in other places?
Well, and we need a combination of things, right? We need the funding. We need the credible partners to come forward and say, this matters, and I'm going to put serious investment capital and grant blended finance capital. Blended finance, this expression around using a combination of grants and what's called concessionary financing together with more commercial capital. We need those big actors to come forward and say, I'm throwing down the gauntlet, I want to see solutions in this area. But then, to your point, we need people who can be those translators, and we need them in the geographies and in the sectors and in the types of businesses that those investors are placing capital in. So I get calls all the time from big investors who say, but do you know somebody who can do this kind of analysis, but they're in Nigeria? I don't want to bring somebody in from London. I want them in Lima or London or Lagos or wherever it might be. And so we need to be able to broaden out this capability. And that's part of why I'm so excited about this series of events, is because I think there are so many experts emerging from within this community that hopefully then will be able to speak about finance and GBV and other gender dynamics in a way that those investors will really value. And it's not to say what they value is the most important thing, but hey, they're moving the capital. This is the other piece I think that's really undervalued, is that there are so many actors who have the capital who aren't using it. And I think we've talked about this over the last couple of weeks. It is a moment now for people to stand up and say, it's my capital. I am going to choose to deploy it and use the power that I have. And by the way, I miss Toolkit so much, the physical version, and your presentation from designing a portfolio that addresses GBV. I went to print it, and my printer messed up and printed like a zillion copies of it in a teeny way. So I made myself a little deck of all of the slides that I can now carry around with me, that I can then say, you know, what is the letter of intent? How do I use my RFP process to actively have somebody design a portfolio? And now I think we're in just such a better place to be able to say to investors, this is a moment for you to use your power to really ask for what we need.
Well, and I think that asking, and you know, there's always this balance between starting simple and expecting that the simple will get folks involved and then we'll engage them, but sometimes you just get stuck at simple. I think this answer, no matter what though, whether you started simple or you start with the more complex analysis, you have to be able to ask for something.
Yeah.
And that's what I think has been so powerful about the last couple of weeks, is really looking at what can people ask for. And I think we're going to be able to ask for a ton, and we're at time, but we're going to be able to ask for a ton. So final thought?
Final thought is, I think that what has been holding back the gender lens investing space from really incorporating GBV, which is where we started this conversation, is that people need those examples that are coming out of these couple of weeks. They need them to build the muscle about how to ask for what they want, and to ask the right questions, to understand how to do the analysis, to understand the predictive modeling that's possible, to have the imagination. And so I'm just really so excited to think about, what can we bring out of this into Gender Smart? How can we help amplify this? And how can all of us collectively be using our own channels and networks to amplify what's coming out of this in a way that is good communication for the target audience that we're really looking to affect? And so, Joy, I want to just thank all of your whole team and the extended team here for putting such an amazing thing together with this Convergence. I can't be more excited. I've been telling everyone I know, wait till you hear what's coming out of it.
There is a lot coming out of this. So, and thank you again for an amazing chat. I go back to, speaking of my amazing team, I just love these points that Tia was making throughout there. Just again, how much of all of this Tia has been driving over the last couple of years. So within that, thank you so much, Suzanne, and always a pleasure we've been friends for, I don't even know how long, but long enough to really know how much I love working with you and moving these things forward together. So with that, be well, and everybody come back for just a couple more conversations and our wrap up, but then another month of workplace that's going to feel like work. We're going to work together for another month past this. No more playing. Anyway, a pleasure to see all of you, and we'll keep this going.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.